The family of cats. How could these cats keep a servant? Long, long ago, when animals could talk, there lived a large family of cats. Their home was in an old house not far from a large town. For years and years, this family of cats had caught all the rats and mice in the country and in the town. These cats were rich enough to keep a servant who kept their house and cooked their meat. No one knew where they got the money to pay for everything, for all of this. For all of this happened long ago. They never kept a servant long, for they were hard to please. Besides, most women soon grew tired of living alone with only cats. When anyone found herself without money, she would say, "I will go and live with the cats." And many a poor woman did. Lizina. What kind of a servant was Lizina? In the town lived a little girl named Lizina. Now Lizina was not happy at her home, for her mother was very much fonder of her older daughter. Sometimes Lizina did not have enough to eat, while her sister had everything she wanted. At last, one day, she said to her mother and sister, "Since you hate me so much, you will be glad to get rid of me. I'm going to live with the family of cats." "Be off with you," cried her mother, seizing an old broom from behind the door. Poor Lizina ran as fast as she could. She never stopped until she reached the door of the cat's house. Their cook had left them there that very morning. Therefore the cats were very glad to see Lizina. She set to work at once to prepare the dinner. As she worked away, first one cat, then another came to the kitchen to see the new servant. One cat and another perched himself on the back of her chair while she peeled apples. A third one sat on the table beside her. 5 or 6 others walked among the pots and pans in the cupboard. All of them purred and purred to show that they were pleased with their new servant. But Lizina did not understand this. Often she did not know what they wanted her to do. But she was not lazy, and she was a good, kind little girl. She picked up the little kittens which stumbled about on the floor. She patched up fights. She took care of the old cat which had a lame paw. Never had the house been kept so clean. Never had the sick cats been so well cared for. Although the cats were quite happy and well pleased, Father Gatto, why did Lizina cry? One day an old cat came to visit. The cat called him their father. He lived by himself in a barn at the top of the hill. From time to time he came down to look after the family. When he saw Lizina, he asked, "Are you well cared for by this nice little girl?" And all the cats answered in one voice, "Oh yes, Father Gatto, we have never had so good a servant." Every time old Gatto came to visit, the answer was always the same. After a time, the old cat thought Lizina looked sad. One day he found her crying. What's the matter?" he asked. "Has anyone been unkind to you?" Then Lizina cried all the more. "Oh, no, no," she sobbed. "They've all been very good to me, but I long for news from home. I want to see my mother and sister." Old Gatto understood. "You shall go home," he said, "and you shall not come back here unless it pleases you. But first I'm going to do something for you. You have been so kind to my children. Follow me down into the cellar. You have never been there yet. I always keep it locked and carry the key with me." Old Ghetto took Lazina down one pair of steps after another until they reached the cellar. The jar of gold. How did Father Ghetto reward Lazina? Lazina looked around in her surprise. Before her stood two big jars, water jars. One was filled with oil, and the other was something shiny like gold. Old Father Ghetto grinned till he shone all his sharp white teeth. "In which of these jars shall I dip you?" he asked. Lazina looked at the two jars. I could not ask to be bathed in gold," she thought to herself. Then she answered Father Ghetto and said, "Into the oil jar." But Father Ghetto replied, "No, no, no, you deserve something better than that." And seizing her in his strong paws, he plunged her into the shining gold. Wonders of wonders! When Lazina came out of the jar, she shone from head to foot like the sun. Father Ghetto purred and purred, for he was well pleased. "Go home," he said. "See your mother and sister, but take care. If you hear the cock crow, then turn toward it. But if you hear the donkey bray, but take care. You must look the other way." Lazina kissed the white paw of the old cat. Then she set off for home. Just as she came near her mother's house, the cock crowed. Quickly she turned toward it. All at once a beautiful golden star appeared on her forehead. At the same time the donkey began to bray. But Lazina took care not to look into the field where the noisy donkey was feeding. Her mother and sister were in front of their house. When they saw her, they cried out in surprise. Lazina took a handkerchief from her pocket and filled it with gold coins. Then the mother and sister cried still louder. For some time the mother and the two sisters lived very happily together, for Lazina had given them everything she had brought away, but her gold clothing would not come off. The gold star, too, would not come off of her forehead. But all the gold pieces that fell out of her pocket had found their way to her mother and sister. Peppina becomes the cat's servant. What kind of a servant was Peppina? One morning, Peppina, the sister, said, "I will go now and see what I can get out of the pussies." So she left her mother's house before the sun rose. I should like some of the cat's gold for myself," she thought. The cats did not have another servant yet. They knew they would never, ever could get one to take Lazina's place. When they heard that Peppina was her sister, they all ran to meet her. She did not like Lazina. The kittens whispered among themselves. "Hush! Be quiet!" The old cat said. "All servants cannot be pretty." To be sure, she was not like Lazina, so the old cat said so too. The very first day, she shut the kitchen door in the face of the tomcats, who liked to watch Lazina at work. A young kitten jumped in the open kitchen window onto the table. Peppina gave him such a blow with a rolling pin that he squalled for an hour. Day by day, things grew worse. The food was not cooked well. The work was badly done. In the corner were heaps of dust. Many spider webs hung from the ceiling. The cats could hardly see out of the windows. The beds were hardly ever made, and the feather bed, which the old and feeble cat loved so well, had never once been shaken since Lazina left the house. Father Ghetto's next visit. As Father Ghetto's next visit, he found the whole family of cats in an uproar. Tom had a broken paw, said one. Peppina kicked him with her great wooden shoe. Jack had a boar on his back where a wooden chair was flung at him. Another said, 3 little kittens died beside their mother. Peppina forgot them in their basket upstairs, said another. We cannot stand her any longer, Father Ghetto, they all cried. Do send her away. Please send her away. Lazina herself would not be angry with her. She must know how very well what her sister is like. Come here, said Father Ghetto in a cross voice to Peppina. The jar of oil. How did Father Ghetto reward Peppina? He took her downstairs to the cellar and showed her 2 large jars he had shown Lazina, in which jar Peppina said in a great hurry, in the gold jar. Father Ghetto's eyes blazed. You have not deserved it, he cried in a loud voice, and seizing her, he flung her into the jar of oil. She nearly strangled. When she came to the top, the old cat seized her again, rolled her on the floor in an ash heap. Then he opened the door, saying, Begone! When you meet the braying donkey, be sure to turn your head towards it. Blind and raging, Peppina set off for home. She found a stick by the wayside to help her. At last, she came near her mother's house. Over in the meadow on the right, she heard a voice of the donkey braying. Quickly, she turned her head towards it, and at the same time put her hand to her forehead, and there she found a donkey's tail. She ran home to her mother, yelling with rage. It took Lazina 2 hours with a pail of hot water, 2 cakes of soap to wash off the ashes and the oil. But the donkey's tail she could not get rid of. It was as fast on her forehead as was the gold star on Lazina's. Their mother was mad and raged. First she beat Lazina with a broom. Then she took her to the well, put her into it. Then she left Lazina weeping and crying. What was Lazina's reward? Now it happened that the king's son had passed by the mother's house one day. He had seen Lazina sitting by the window sewing. She was so beautiful that he had come back 2 or 3 times to look at her. One day he came near the window and said, Beautiful maiden, will you be my bride? And Lazina answered, I will be your bride, I will. The next morning the prince came to claim his bride. He found her wrapped in a large white veil. Even her face was covered. Now the mother wished to make the prince marry Peppina instead of Lazina. So she had twisted the donkey's tail up in a bun and made a lock of hair under the veil. The prince was young and frightened. He did not look at his bride. He put Peppina in a carriage beside him and drove away. The report had gone about that the prince was to marry the most beautiful maiden in the world, and on this maiden's forehead shone a golden star. Now the family of cats knew that this was their own dear Lizina. The prince's carriage went past the old house where the cats lived. There was all the cats at the window looking out. Then they sang out in one voice, "Meow, meow, meow. Prince, look quick behind you. In the well is fair Lizina. You have nothing but Peppina." The coachman knew the cat's language better than the prince, so he stopped the horses and asked, "Does this highness know what the pussies are saying?" Just then the cats sang out again, "Meow, meow, meow. Prince, look quick behind you. In the well is Lizina. You have nothing but Peppina." The prince drew back the veil. He saw the donkey's tail twisted around Peppina's ugly head. At once he ordered the horses to turn around. When they reached the mother's house, he demanded Lizina in a loud voice that the mother was frightened. She hurried to the well, pulled out Lizina. Then the prince took Lizina home to kiss to the king his father. Lizina's clothing and her star shone so bright that the whole place was lighted up. The next day Lizina and the prince were married, and all the cats and all the old Father Ghetto came to the wedding. That's the end. Yeah. And I told that over and over to the Smithers kids.
Yeah, that and the golden arm.
And the golden
That was another
arm.
good one.
That's just our family treat.